Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Media Show on the Pod TV Network. I'm Nick Pellavito. Will be your moderator for today's food fight. Something that we didn't bring up too much on our last show, but we're going to bring up today, which is the college protesters' scholarships. Apparently, there was protests that took place around the United States relating to the war in Gaza between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And then next thing we know, Northwestern University offers 5 scholarships fully paid for Palestinian students and also 2 faculty members for Palestinian faculty. And with that, we're going to bring in from Los Angeles, California, Rick Rosner. I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. We didn't discuss it last because I know that would bring up a food fight. And I thought Dr. Statman was interesting. We're all the same political. No, we're not.
No.
I don't think everybody.
I'm not sure whether he thought we were all Trumpy or all libs. I don't know.
I don't know what he thought, but if he watched a lot of the shows, I can guarantee you we're not all same political persuasion. And we didn't bring it up also because that would be a firestorm. But with Shaquille Latmer, we're going to bring him from Australia. I don't know if you know the latest firestorm that we're looking at in the United States is Northwestern University. It just really got me. Northwestern University. What they did is they offered to settle the protest, Shaquille. They gave 5 scholarships to Palestinians and 2 faculty appointments. Okay. And it just got my Irish up because I'm going, wait a minute. You protest and you get scholarships because you're Palestinian? Are you serious? I thought the metric was wrong. I mean, forget all the other garbage. In other words, if I applied for the faculty member, oh, Mr. Pallavito, you can't be on faculty. Why not? You're not a Palestinian. What? But I know my subject matter really well. No, it doesn't matter. You're not Palestinian. Next, apply for a scholarship. No, you can't get a scholarship. Your grandkids can't get it. Why not? You're not Palestinian. How'd they get those? Well, they had a protest. Yeah, Rick, go on.
So I want to talk about the protests in general for a sec before I compare these protests to when I was a little kid and the Vietnam War protests were going on. And those felt a lot more violent and chaotic and like they were effing up the country more than these protests do. And I like the way these protests have gone on for the most part because they haven't been that disruptive. And when it comes to, 8,600 undergraduates at Northwestern University, more than 60% of them, that is more than, 5,300 of them get financial aid. So you're saying, 5 of the 5,300 getting financial aid are going to be Palestinians. That's 1/10 of 1%. You don't like the deal, but I'm saying for 1/10 of 1%, for adding to the scholarships by 1/10 of 1%, you've solved this problem on campus. I think that's a cheap deal they made to avoid further disruption.
I think it was a bad deal. I don't know. Have you even heard about this in Australia, Shaquille? If you go into college, you protest, we're just going to grant you scholarships. Well, what metric are you going to use? Are you going to be high caliber students? Are you going to have high SAT scores? Good. No. You just have to be Palestinian. Well, then
I'm sure that's not the only criterion. So, for every student that gets into Northwestern, 14 students apply. They only let in 7%. I'm sure they're not going to let in.
Is that some elitist?
Okay, let me respond to you guys. So, firstly, I do know about this, Nick, because I pay a lot more attention to US news than I do to Australian news because I trade markets and I'm exposed to US news. But Rick, I don't think it's not really a matter of how small the percentage of people are as a percentage of the total. It's what these protesters are trying to achieve. In the first place, I will say, without taking a position on Israel-Palestine, I will say that, sure, everybody should have the right to be able to express their viewpoint of what government policy should be and should be able to protest. That's fine. What I don't think is acceptable is that when Jewish children or Jewish young people at college are being told that they can't go to school or they can't be protected or they're being threatened, I just don't think that's okay. And whether they be Jewish or any other minority group, that just shouldn't be okay. That's not the sort of countries that we are in Australia and the UK and the US and Canada, etc. That's not what we're about. And so that's the problem that I have. And I think that to allow them to be rewarded for it is wrong. But also, I listen to the chants and to what they say at these protests. So one of them, for example, when that beautiful young Swedish girl who is a genius on climate change decides to say at a protest, "No climate justice on stolen land." Huh? What the hell does that mean? Or more importantly, these protests that are saying from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. Okay, well, let's talk about that then. If you're out there protesting and that's what you're asking for, can we talk about what that actually means? What is it that you want? Are you proposing, which I can understand, are you proposing that there shouldn't be a two-state solution, that there should be a one-state solution, and that Palestine and Israel, that the people that live in those two places should be able to share the land of both places together? Is that what you're suggesting, and how would that work? Or are you suggesting that the Jewish people should just leave Israel? And if that's the case, where do you suppose they should go? This is the problem with these protests. Just stop oil. Okay, just stop oil. Okay, yeah, cool. We've just stopped oil. Now what? Nothing works. We don't have clothes. We don't have furniture. We don't have anything because we just stopped oil like that. It's not practical.
Shaquille isn't part of it.
So when these protests are carrying on like that, Rick, and they're using quite violent language, quite threatening behavior towards minority people, I'm not sure that that's a good idea.
But Shaquille, isn't part of the problem that, and I know Jacoby has brought it up as well, I brought it up as well also, is that sometimes the chants are slogans, and they're kind of done in sloganistic kind of fashion, and they're not necessarily what the people are asking for. Defund the police. Nobody was asking them to actually totally abandon, at least the vast majority, the police and all along those lines. And they were.
That's the problem. If you talk about defund the police, that's the problem. Because when people came out and said, "Hang on, defund the police," that sounds a bit ridiculous. You guys decided to just attack them as being racist and they don't understand what oppression's like, and et cetera, et cetera. So you can't have it both ways. When you go out there and you protest and you say, "I want this," okay, well, how do we give this particular thing that you're asking for to you? Is that practical? Racist, sexist, whatever. And then later on, when it doesn't work, then you say, "Oh, well, that's not really what we meant." So in other words, if I'm to believe what you're saying, Mark, that protesters are just using slogans and they're not really meant to be taken seriously, then fair enough, we should ignore the protesters and not take them seriously.
No, I mean, I don't think you have to ignore the protesters, because I can even come back to something that Nick had brought up as well. But I mean, most people know that the streets are actually, for the most part, owned by the federal government and or the state government and all along those lines. But one of the popular chants that you would hear quite often around the community is "Whose streets? Our streets," and everything, even though if you follow economics and maybe if you follow...
I heard the same chant that says, "Make America great again, make America great again." I love those chants, but let's listen to the Toby chant.
I mean, just to point out, yes, it's just a slogan. People didn't discuss and find out actually what people were talking about. When you actually talk to people, it wasn't defund the police, just as Mark said. Just because the campaign slogan was there, it's an easy bumper sticker, and people got argumentative over the actual slogan, and therefore the discussion stayed surface level at the actual bumper sticker and did not actually talk about what the defund the police movement was about. Hence the reason we're stuck at where we are now. Because this did not start at October 7th. These protests did not start then. It began to bubble up when people started ignoring the fact that more and more people were getting killed, more and more innocent individuals that they saw were getting killed, the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, and so on and so forth. So people started bubbling up and getting upset about it. And as I've stated before, and we can use as an example right now, Rick is one of the greatest people. He's super nice. I love Rick to death.
Right.
But you'll even notice how Rick, when he's raising his hand, if we begin to ignore him, his hand begins to get a little bit more agitated, and he waves it even louder. And then if we keep ignoring him, he's going to wave both hands. And if we keep ignoring him, he's going to get pissed off and still wave it. But that's what the protesters are going through. The protesters, yes. Jack, we all agree. Don't interrupt. Let me finish. I did not interrupt you. So we can all agree that, yes, the saying "from the river to the sea," even when Netanyahu used it, is very offensive. It is genocidal in its topic, in its talking point when it's talking about clearing out the other side. So yes, it's a bad saying, and it should never use it. So what I'm trying to say is, individuals that are there, and we all it's bad, but listen to the actual majority of the populace or the majority of the protesters, because they have something that they need to talk about. Hence the reason why Northwestern and Brown actually doing it, and they actually quelled the protest that was going on in their campuses. It's just a matter of discussion, and if we can't talk, then just like I pointed out with Rick, he's going to get mad, just like the protesters. So Rick, take it away.
Well, Rick,
All right. So the protesters aren't they have a range of beliefs, and it includes knuckleheads and idiots who don't understand what from the river to the sea means. And on the other side, I mean, and you got paid or like outside agitators. At UCLA, they had counter protesters coming in, including Proud Boys who just wanted to tear gas and bust heads. So, you've got a variety of, from people who understand and who are earnest, and also jerks and jerk-offs. But it has moved the needle. For the first time since October 7th, the U.S. is blocking an arms shipment to Israel.
Yeah.
So Rick, let me just come in on a couple of points. So Jatovi, made mention that people become more agitated when they haven't been listened to for a long time. I get that. I do. I don't think that is in any way the case with a bunch of 20-year-old college kids. Okay, they don't have if they're not from there, they don't have the history. They don't know. How many American kids know or are experts coming out of high school on Israel, Palestine? Most American kids barely know where Canada is. So, don't tell me that these kids are really that passionate about it. That they jump on any protest that they feel is appropriate at the time. That's
it makes them feel connected.
That right there is a horrible statement. You're stating. That's a horrible statement. You're stating that if you do not have something, you should not care about it. We have a big push against AIDS. Wait, let me explain. This is what I heard then, Shaq. You said that those 20-year-olds don't understand because they aren't even from there. They've never been there. Am I correct in that understanding?
Jatovi, I'm going to continue speaking to Rick.
Am I correct in that understanding?
I'm not going to play this game if you dissect the things that I've said.
I am asking you a simple question.
Make your point, and then
okay, I'll make my point, Shaq, because you're going to repeat exactly what I just stated, that these 20-year-olds don't know anything about it and don't understand the history of that area because they are not from there. Those are your exact words, which is saying that those individuals they should not care about it because they don't know about it, which is a horrible statement. Because, for example, you aren't from Africa, but you do good work in Africa in terms of trying to help finances there. You aren't from the U.S., but yet you're on a channel that mainly talks about U.S. places, which you aren't even from. So why do you care? It's because you can have the ability to care about these other things. So those individuals that some have family members there, some have family members that have other family members that could be there. Some have relationships in some way. Some just care about the people, and some just don't want to see death. So we've got to listen to them instead of saying, hey, I don't care what you say because you're not even from there. So you're just ignorant of the whole situation. So your comments are just dumb. That is what you're saying, and that's a bad way. And that's what put us in the position that we are now with people protesting.
Now, can I continue?
I do not want to listen to him, but go on, Shaquille.
Now, can I continue? Is that all right? But I will just respond. I'll humor Jatovi and respond very quickly, and then I'll continue with what I was saying to Rick. At no point did I say the things that you've just attributed to me, Jatovi. There is no reason for you to get into what I personally do with my involvement in Africa or elsewhere. And when you say that I come onto channels which are predominantly American, if you don't want me here, tell me. The reason I make comments on American matters is because you people invite me onto the show and then ask me about them. And it's only when I say something you don't agree with and you throw in my face that I'm not American. If you want this to only be Americans, then say that. If you want it to be about everybody else,
never said any of that. So you just got agitated and didn't listen to a word I stated.
Now back to the point that I was making. Okay. The fact that these people who don't have much experience in these matters, Rick, get out there and protest and carry on and expect to be taken seriously. Then they say, well, we would like to have a conversation. Well, where are the young Jewish kids that are frightened to say anything? Where are the people that are being attacked who don't feel that they can say anything without exposing themselves to being attacked further? And as I've said on previous shows previously here in Sydney, we had a protest where they, out the front of one of the world's most iconic buildings, the Sydney Opera House, called for kill the Jews, F the Jews, and gas the Jews. Now, if you were to say that, the people on the political left seem to love these sorts of catch cries and think that it's totally appropriate and okay to say that. I don't. And if you said that about any other minority, if you said that about people of color, you would be arrested for doing that. For some reason, it's perfectly okay, and I don't think it is. I think it's wrong, and I think it should be called out.
We have already established the fact that we all agree that is atrocious to say, that is atrocious behavior. Everything you stated is arguing out of emotion because you're not listening. You're not listening to anything that I've said. So as I pointed out,
I need to listen to what you've said because my comments were directed at Rick. They weren't directed at you. They were directed at Rick.
Can't talk. Okay.
No,
I got you, Shaq. Shaq, take it away with Rick. Talk to Rick.
So if you twice say the same thing, and all you're doing is saying that people can't have an opinion.
Talk to Rick. Talk to Rick.
Then shut up.
Shut up.
So I haven't been to a protest. And so there are protests on about 50 college campuses the last time I looked. I don't know. I feel like I could go to the UCLA and stand near the protests and not feel unsafe, but kind of I'm an idiot about stuff like that. But I don't know, like of the 50 places with protests are, how many of them are threatening the Jews? My kid attended one of those campuses where she doesn't go there anymore, but where they're telling Jews not to show up. So I don't know. Are all the protests unsafe for Jews? Are all the protests, do they have speakers who want to slaughter all the Jews? Of course that's
as we had talked on Friday, it's the same thing that yes, there is a huge problem and a huge rift that's going on. And people, as you pointed out, you've got anti-protesters coming in that are agitators that are doing just anti-Muslim, all this bad stuff on one side. You have agitators on the other side that are being anti-Israel and anti-Jew and attacking. Those things are atrocious. But we're feeding into that fact if we don't talk. And this is what we were talking about. I think it was Friday, how it is a very unsafe situation, and these individuals need to bring in heads of and yes, it is decentralized, completely decentralized. And until we quell the major part of the protest, which needs to be listened to, those opportunists and agitators are going to keep flooding in. So we need to bring together again, and I use Northwestern and Brown as the example because they began to quell their protesters, and now it's a little bit safer for everyone on campus because you negotiated, you talked. So yes, we've got to bring in those that feel fear, those that are upset about the protesters themselves and feel that they are being unjustly lumped in with a situation that they aren't even a part of. Like we shouldn't have a situation where Jewish Americans should be fearful of going to school. We should not have that situation, but we do. So we've got to bring them in and discuss ways to make make them feel safe, as well as bring in those protesters that, even though it's decentralized, if we could bring in some of the major players in those protests, because they're there, and this would be independent for each college, but bring in those discussions, bring them all in one group, have them talk, because those protesters need to know that placing these individuals in fear does not help the protests and does not help their discussions, does not help move what they want moved. And so then we begin negotiations. Then we begin to work things out and work together as a group, because those protesters and counter protesters, that's a bigger group than just each individual. So if you work them together and begin to discuss, find an equal playing field, find that ground that you can work together on and move forward. And that's where we should be. But right now, we just have two sides.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Both you and Shaquille. Just really quickly, because I got one of these letters. I'm not going to lie. I did sign it and everything. But should there be efforts by some of these protesters? Because I do know that there were some academic teachers at UNC that were feeling that the way that the protest was handled was not handled well. So they are actually now asking for the chancellor, as you said earlier, to divest some of that money off of Israel in the case of, I believe that was the UNC campus, and to also possibly even get rid of the either the chancellor or the dean. It's one of the academic folks that they want to have step down because of their viewpoint and all along those lines. So is that something that we need to be having those conversations as well?
How do you have the environment to have open conversations if people are going to lose their jobs if they have the wrong opinion? How do you have that? How do you have a situation that you say on the one hand that we should listen to and engage with the protesters, okay, and then when you try talking to them, they come up with things like from the river to the sea, and you say, well, how's that going to work? And they don't have any solutions, okay? This is the problem. And even if we were to sit down with every college and university protester across Australia and the UK and Canada and etc., even if we sit down with all of them and say, okay, please tell us what it is that you think we should do in relation to the conflict within Palestine and Israel, is that going to then change international policy? Is that going to change the decades of conflict that has occurred in the Middle East, not just with Israel and Palestine, but all throughout the Middle East? Of course not. So all that's happening is that there has been a response that some people in the community don't like, and they are being quite vicious and violent in expressing that without offering any kind of solution that is workable. And when I say that young college kids who don't have any experience are well equipped to deal with this, they're well equipped to deal with it precisely because they don't have the experience. They haven't been to these areas. They don't understand the geopolitics of these areas, and they're just jumping on another bandwagon.
But Shaquille, hold on a second. Both of you, hold on a second, because one of the things, when I was in college in the 80s, there was a whole push around divestiture of South Africa and involvement in South Africa. And I'm not going to lie, I was in some of those protests. I was also in some of those protests about Ernest Lacey, who was one of the original George Floyds there in Milwaukee. So as a young, I'm now in my 60s, but as a young 20-something-year-old, yes, I was involved in those protests. But that's because I came from a family of activists. And so they had already told me that definitely if you have an opinion, or if you want to share your opinion, to go ahead and use that. And even here at Durham, I've mentioned it before, the Allen building takeover was why there is now, even though they're talking about getting rid of them, some of the black studies, there's some of the like black centers and things along those lines, because during those protests, there was demands. And I imagine that even in these protests, there are demands that are being asked about. Now, whether those demands are fully met or whether they are only partially met. Because even the black churches had demands.
Let me say a thing here.
You still have the problem that could be more destabilizing to Israel and Palestine. Right? These kids don't know. They're not from there.
No.
They're not from there. They don't understand
South Africa.
Hold on, wait. Can we?
I had an opinion about South Africa.
All right, so
you don't understand these.
I have a question here. I have a question. How do you coordinate these things? In the 60s, the civil rights movement was fantastically coordinated by brilliant strategists. You had the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent coordinating committee. Coordinating's right in their title, and everybody was unified. They had the same tactics.
Rick, they did not have the same tactics. One of the greatest memes that I saw recently was a protest about, it was a meeting with Martin Luther King, and it's a thing where he is standing in front of the looters and everything. So you see the looting in the background, and he's saying, I'm getting ready to lead another nonviolent march.
Oh, that's great. What we should do is give a scholarship only to looters.
Hold on. We are sitting here. Here's
Looters.
No, this is what we're doing right now.
That's a good metric.
This is our argument right now. This is coming from both Nick and this is coming from Shaq, is that we should just ignore them and just arrest them. But that's not how you create a solution, because hold on, wait, let me finish. Okay, well, Shaq, I'll take you out of it. Never mind. This is what Nick's argument always is. So therefore, Shaq, you can calm. So just to point out and answer what Rick was actually asking, and this is where we should be. We should ask ways to quell the situation where we're able to come up with a solution, because Shaq, even in the 60s, as Rick pointed out, it was about civil rights. There was one side that was saying that we want freedoms. There was another side that said black folk are not equal to white folk. And that was a huge population that did that. The way that they came about is because they got to a point where they were able to negotiate. And just as right now, as a prime example, those same protests that you're saying that you cannot come up with a solution because people don't want to listen, people do, if you give them the opportunity. Hence the reason you came up with a solution at Northwestern and Brown. It was a workable solution. It did not. Wait, let me finish. It was a workable solution for both Northwestern and Brown. It is independent for those schools, because what ends up happening, because as Rick has pointed out on multiple occasions, which is very true, this is very decentralized. It's independent per school. So UNC's protest is different from MIT's protest, which is different from UCLA's protest. So each campus has to pull together these students and start talking. Because again, if you're not going to talk, the only thing you're going to do, because Shaq, yes, we completely agree. This is not going to change what's going. Listen to what I'm saying. We are not. What they're doing is not going to change with Netanyahu. What's going on between Netanyahu and the Palestinian people? It's not going to change that. But what it is going to do is give peace to the individuals on those campuses that are actually looking for just anything, just a glimmer of hope. Hence the reason the kids at Northwestern was calling for similar things about, yes, Netanyahu needs to change and the geopolitics needs to change. But what they got wasn't that. It's the same thing when you go into any negotiation. If you're buying a car to buying a house, I'm going to start at this price. They're going to come in at this price. We're going to negotiate to a point that's workable. So that's what has to happen. And until that happens, we're going to sit here in this battle.
So people who are politically moderate, like myself, right, who try to look at different things and see if there's any kind of negotiation or middle ground that can be found, am supposed to stand by and say that it's perfectly reasonable for college kids to threaten Jews with genocide.
Nobody said that. Stop falling to that. Stop defaulting to that. Stop defaulting to that. No, because you keep defaulting to an extremist position that nobody has taken. Nobody has taken that position. Why do you keep going there? Everybody on this panel has said, no, that is atrocious. Every single person. Rick said it. Mark said it. I've said it. Nick said it. You keep defaulting to an extremist position to make some pigeonholed argument that nobody is making on the panel. Absolutely nobody. So again,
Rick, I'm gonna let you go because I'm sick and tired of being browbeaten by this moron. So I'm off.
I have some news. Brown University has also reached an agreement with the protesters. The protesters have agreed to clear out, as Brown has agreed to vote on divestment from Israel in October. So that to me seems like reasonable on both sides.
And they'll vote on it.
And I feel like on the campuses, I would guess that since they're not coordinated, some of the protests are led by knuckleheads and other protests are led by reasonable people. And I don't know what the breakdown between reasonable protesters and knuckleheads is.
I mean, that's part of the thing. And the other part of the question is that there have been, and that's what I was going to bring up, and Nick may be surprised about this as well, but there have been people even on the Jewish side that have come out in support of the protests in Palestine and all along those lines. And I know some people even on this network have said that those are folks that are being browbeaten into being in that position. But I don't think that's the case. I think that they are authentically concerned about people that are of Palestinian background that are in their neighborhood, and they are willing to support those folks that are willing to do these protests and all along those lines, even if they are pro-Palestine.
Well, it seems to me Northwestern already got sued for their racist response to the protest, which is to limit the 5 scholarships to Palestinians and 5 faculty and 2 faculty members. So they're going to be in court based on civil rights. In other words, the thing is violating everybody else's civil rights.
But Nick, there's a counterclaim to that as well, because there was a claim, I think that was at Northwestern as well, that was done by the Muslim students, because they were feeling, just as not Nick Shaquille was saying earlier, that there were Israeli students that were feeling threatened, that there were a number of Palestinian students that were also feeling threatened because of their garb and what they were wearing and everything. So there are actually 2 claims that are going on, because that is what is happening, is that it is not just on one side or the other. There is this kind of racism that is taking place on both sides.
Yeah, and I think Northwestern is setting a bad example, and so is Brown. But go on, Rick.
So this again makes me wonder, how did the civil rights protests end up so coordinated versus every set of protests and riots and everything? And wait, so I'm going to partly answer my question. I think one reason is because if they didn't coordinate, they would have been killed by the racist forces in the states where they were protesting.
Well, that's part of it, but I have a theory about that as well. It's a theory that I've shared with several friends of mine, is that if you want to look, and we can even go to India, we can go to South Africa, we can go to definitely the civil rights movement, but it is my theory that if you want to have effective change, you actually have to have pulls from both sides. So part of the reason that there was the civil rights change was that for the Martin Luther King, there was a Malcolm X. And for the kind of the SNCC kind of version, there was the Black Panthers. And I would say the same thing about India. I would say the same thing about South Africa and a number of other things. So you got to have somebody that the government side is willing to go to, because they think that is a easier solution than the other side, and that's usually the moderate side.
I think it's easier to organize today because of social media. So if they all want to organize between emails, social media, it's pretty easy to organize these protests. And again, like I said, they have the right to go out and protest. I have a problem with that. I do have a problem with the solution of the universities, especially Northwestern, a little less, but still on Brown University, because that's not the solution. If Jacoby says is correct, there's talk, dialogue, education, etc., and also some sort of push to get Netanyahu, who's apparently behind this, from slaughtering 35,000 people in Gaza, which everybody in national news knows about. So I don't need some college 20-year-old punk to come tell me, oh, they're slaughtering people in Gaza. I already know that. Okay. I do not need you as a 20-year-old to come tell me that that's happening. I already know that's happening.
And I think
also, if you want to protest the U.S. government. They're going to give them what? $23 billion in aid, money that we don't have, that we have to go in debt for. So if they want to do a protest, they need to go to Washington, D.C. Get out of the universities. They don't have any money. They do have money. But go to Washington, D.C. and tell your congressman, don't send $23 billion to Israel. I
think Rick has the answer in terms of coordination. Because also during that time, during the civil rights, you also had the radio that was actually, the smaller radio stations that were pumping out in the Black community some information that was going to coordinate some stuff that helped out. Also, it was like the local school radios, if I remember, Mark. that were pumping in
the black press.
Yep. And they were pushing, that was where a lot of the similar coordination started happening and helping. And yes, social media could be used. So with the solution, with one of the two schools that have now come up with a solution, a workable solution for their schools. And that's what we have to really focus on, is that the school has worked it out with the kids and the protest is quelled. And if that is a solution for that school, then hopefully one of those individuals or a few of the individuals who coordinated that effort and actually worked together, they could work with that school, can begin a campaign for the other schools. So then those other schools become coordinated, because yes, if we have more coordination in that, that would make this a lot easier for everyone, because then it goes from schools to exactly right where you are, Nick, where you're talking about. It should be at the U.S. government, because right now it's so trapped. We're at
level. I agree.
Yeah, and that's where I'm saying that we're at that surface level argument. If we can get out of that surface level argument, which is the college campuses, so therefore, if they can have those discussions, if we could push to Northwestern and Brown and say, these are the examples of working together with the students to quell, and then begin to take those students at Northwestern and Brown as leaders in this area or in this arena for their schools, talk to the other schools, find some type of coordination, some link, and then the other schools begin to work with Northwestern and Brown and figure out a way, hey, let's begin to work this together as a bigger unit. Yeah. That means schools work together, all the students work together, and then the students, it would happen that we'd get off the surface level argument at the college campuses, where the students then would move to protesting at the government entities, like you were saying, Nick, which was where they should be.
Yeah. I mean, that because the thing is, the U.S. government can do more than some college professor or some college administrator.
And the U.S. government has done a thing. They've held up the shipments of arms. So
that was a good thing. Right. No, I'm saying that's a good thing. And the other thing is, they do need to take note, and media needs to take note. They did. And this is Netanyahu's war. It's like Putin's war is Ukraine. Netanyahu is Gaza. And he could have done it properly by being more strategic and surgical in terms of going after Hamas, but he didn't give a rat's rear. He's just blowing up everything that's in his sight. So I think the media is definitely one good place to start. But the real problem, it's over there. It's actually in Netanyahu and his group of cronies, just like Putin and his group of cronies. And this needs to be addressed, unfortunately or fortunately, at that particular
but Nick,
level.
One of the questions I was going to ask you, this is for you, Toby, and Rick, and it's something I brought up on this show as well as other shows. Isn't part of the purpose of education is to develop people into being better critical thinkers? And if that's the case, why are we complaining that young 20-year-olds are taking a stand? I have no problem with this person taking a stand, even if it's a stand that I don't agree with. Now, in this case, I do agree with what they are protesting about, quite a bit of it and everything. But even if it's something that I don't agree with, I think that that's part of what the development of college education is supposed to be about, is development.
I'm in agreement with that. But at the end of the day, don't put a gun to my head and say, give us 5 scholarships. I ain't going to do that, and don't say I need to appoint 2 faculty members. Now, does Northwestern have the right to be extorted? Oh, absolutely, they do. Oh. And of course, are they being sued under Title IX? Absolutely, they will be. Will they win the case? Probably not. They'll probably lose that case. So maybe even the attorneys knew that, hey, we'll throw in the towel this direction, knowing that somebody will sue, and then they'll get rid of the scholarships and the faculty members at the end of the day, because the judge will tell them you can't do this. In other words,
remember,
violating the law doesn't mean you get to violate the law going the other way.
But remember, they negotiated this. The protesters started. But the protesters started out.
I negotiated a contract that scholarships can be for white males only.
But But the thing is, Northwestern. Remember, they started out with nothing. Northwestern wasn't going to give anything, so then they gave this. Because that was their negotiation thing. The students started out in a different position as well.
Back up a second.
So this is what they negotiated.
Are most colleges now fairly integrated? Are most colleges now fairly integrated?
What I think
Nick,
that might
are most
have happened
colleges now fairly integrated?
they're good chess players. They saw
No, but
teams
hold on a
and-
second. I got
They
you
knew
married
that
and everything, but are most colleges now fairly integrated?
Because you made
But
a comment
Nick, you might honestly,
They
Nick,
wanted-
you might be right in your assessment.
to get
But
sued, and
Nick,
Northwestern would say, "Oh, too
again,
bad, protest. You lost
you
your
might
scholarship."
you might be right in your assessment that this
They
is what they
went
threw out. They threw this out just because they know they would get sued and they'd lose.
And
But
lose.
again, they started out at nothing, but they negotiated to this. So that is all the protesters really want, is some type of at least attempt on your end to come to the middle with me, instead of, hey, I'm going to be on an extreme, you're going to be on an extreme, and we'll never meet in the middle.
Toby, wasn't that
I
part of the
think
point
it's
as well?
gonna be
Wasn't that part of the point of most of the
Those
colleges? Because most colleges that are now fairly integrated, most of the PWIs and most of the colleges in general, is because of students protesting on those campuses and wanting to have those colleges get a greater amount of minority participation. That's the reason that there are a decent amount of minorities on Duke's campus, a decent amount of minorities on UNC's campus. But if it wasn't for people like I think you said it was your father, Jacoby, doing those protests and everything, then that would not have happened, because they had to get to the table in order to have the negotiation. And I think that's part of what's going on, Nick, is that they've got to get to the table.
Yeah, but they may have been outplayed. I mean, the thing is,
All right,
it's quite
so
possible. Again, I don't know the Northwestern attorneys. They may have said, "Oh yeah,
so
let's throw in the
Northwestern
towel
has
and
been
offer them
sued.
a legal contract," and then knowing that someone will sue and they'll get thrown out of court. Yeah, right.
Northwestern has already been sued for violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the grounds of race, color, or national origin.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I was referring to. I think they filed two suits for that, both the Jewish and the Muslim community.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant. They negotiated an illegal contract with a bunch of 20-year-olds that don't know what they're doing. The attorney said, "Don't worry, it'll get thrown out anyway." Why didn't they offer them 300 scholarships?
No, but the thing is, Nick, they negotiated, and that is all the students want, because the reason they negotiated. But the thing is, it's the, hey, you listen to my gripe, and now that you've heard my gripe, you tried to work with me, so I appreciate that. And that's all the protesters are doing, because they're sitting here yelling and yelling and yelling, but nobody's talking to them.
Tender tampon unless you listen to me. I'm a 20-year-old. I'm going to throw a tender tampon unless you listen to me. Okay, we listen to you. We're going to give you something illegal. Oh, great. I won. Oh, great. I won. I won because I got something illegal.
Yeah, I think everyone's getting very hung up.
Because I'm a 20-year-old. So
I think everyone's getting very hung up on the fact that I mentioned that they're 20-year-olds. That's not the point that I'm making, and I'm certainly not suggesting that 20-year-olds, by virtue of their age, should not be allowed to advocate for positions. What I'm simply saying is that I'm not sure what's being achieved by this. I really don't know. And you know, Jacoby makes a comment that Brown and Northwestern have given scholarships to these 5 kids. That in no way helps the Palestinians or the issue that is being faced by Israel and Palestine right now. In no way did that have any bearing on it. That's my main concern. Whenever we sit down with protesters, with advocates or activists for particular things, very rarely do they actually have a solution that we can work with, right? Just stop oil. No, we can't just stop oil. We need oil for now. What are we going to do to try to reduce our environmental impact and our pollution? Okay, those are legitimate questions. These activists oftentimes don't have answers. And to come back to the core issue here, the core issue here is whether or not the Israeli response to Palestine was disproportionate, and whether or not the major international countries should be supporting Israel or should be asking Israel to back off. Now, I don't know, okay, but I certainly don't think the 20-year-old knows. I don't think that college kids who aren't from there, who don't understand these issues, are in any position to try to dictate government policy, especially considering that these issues are not just about October 7th, as you said, Jacoby. These issues go back decades. So when you get these protests and the so-called solution is to give a few kids scholarships, that's outrageous. What about the Israeli kids? What about the families of those kids that were murdered on October 7th? Do they get this treatment?
Just to push back on what you're stating.
I said the sky was blue, that you'd push back on it.
no. Just to push back on what you're saying, that it doesn't help. For you, your idea is that it doesn't help. These individuals negotiated to that point. So in their minds, it does. And they could be seeing some type of diversity thing that they're pushing towards an understanding of the Palestinian people, which the Palestinian people have always been misunderstood, which especially in this situation, they are all seen as Hamas supporters and Hamas themselves, and they deserve. That's what a lot of the individuals could have been seen being there. So we don't know, but what we do know is that the protesters themselves negotiated for this. So they felt this was. Let me finish.
Why you never
they
let me
felt that they felt that this was something that they could work with for their campus, and that it was a positive move. Sure, it's not going to change Netanyahu and what he's doing in Gaza. Sure, it doesn't talk about the geopolitics of who's supporting who and what. No, but it deals with what they've negotiated and asked for. That is the way you work towards a solution. Because if you just keep saying, well, it doesn't change if there was a murder down the street, and there's crime in Kentucky, but yet we arrest this one individual that committed the murder, but that doesn't do anything to Kentucky, so we shouldn't arrest. No, that's what they're seeing in their mind. So we should just focus on the fact that we should focus on the fact that they negotiated to something that they were agreeable to. And why isn't that a positive? I don't know. That is something that they agreed to. And that has quelled the protests. And it's not violent and going crazy. So yes, that if we could focus on what are the solutions, it's not the end all solution to geopolitics. We're never going to have a utopian society, and it's never going to finish that way. But they negotiated to something that's workable for them. That's a positive.
Jacoby, you say it's a positive, okay? There's some people that don't think it is, all right? Now, you say that, well, you've said a lot of things just there. One of the things that you said earlier, and then when I repeated it, you cut me off. You said that when you're trying to negotiate, you start off here and then you come down. If what you're trying to suggest is that these protesters are out there advocating for the genocide of Jews because what they really want—
That's not all of them. And the major— you keep— this is where I jumped in and I had to say, let's not do— I'm doing it because you're starting with a false equivalence. You're starting with false accusations. Let's start with a middle ground.
Why don't you just shush for a bit? It's not going to hurt you.
Stop going to some extreme position. That's not where they're at.
Hold on a second, Jacoby.
I barely even make an appearance anymore. You have as much time to express your view on these shows as you could possibly hope for. I barely even show up. Why are you so sensitive that you can't listen to a response and then respond to it?
Shat, you're starting off with an extremist position that nobody's taking and that we are not talking about. You're starting off with, hey, they're raping women. So how can you negotiate with raping women? That's not where they're at, and that's not what the protesters are. So let's start with an honest position and have a good discussion. That's all I'm asking.
They are advocating for when they use slogans. All right, Jacoby. You know what, mate? You know what? No, Mark. I'm going to do what I always do with you guys. All right. I'm going to let you engage in the other side in conversation by shutting them down and ridiculing them and doing all that sort of stuff. And then sitting there going, I don't understand why anybody who doesn't agree with me. I have no idea.
Shaquille, I had a question for you.
I'm sure the audience feels so much more enlightened.
This isn't even about that. I had another question because I was actually getting ready to get off of this
conversation.
But it actually deals with, hold on a second, because it actually deals with something that is part of your life and everything. And I was glad that you came back and everything because it was something that I was going to bring up in the media, because hopefully Nick was going to be here, but apparently there is a media company that is also a hedge fund. You are a hedge fund investor and everything. So one of the things that the Hunter Brook media is talking about is that they are mixing hedge fund and journalism. So one of the questions that is being asked is, can you blend the two together? So, and that's something that I saw that was in the news recently and everything. So I just wondered your thoughts as one that comes from that background, because they were even saying that this might be a way for media to start the finding funding is to go the hedge fund route.
No, I have absolutely no idea what the hedge fund's objectives are. Rick?
So, in practical terms, it doesn't matter whether the scholarships stand. On the one hand, they reached an agreement. That's thing one. Thing two is these elite schools, admissions is handled like artisanally. They sit down and they in committee and present the case of each student for thousands of students. Does this student, this student be make a good addition to our academic community? Will they manage to graduate? Will they bring fame and contributions to the university in later life? Every kid gets looked at individually and argued about in committee. And I'm sure in the future, there will be some Palestinian kids who get argued over. Were they a dick during protests? Did they do anything productive? And that'll be part of the discussion, whether or not these scholarships survive.
Rick, this kind of behavior is so destabilizing to our societies. Okay. Now let's go back 10, 20 years ago, and especially 20 years ago. There was an incredible anti-Islamic sentiment around the Western world. Now, I understand why, of course, after September 11 and other types of terrorist activity, of course there was. One of the things that came up in the years afterwards, in the UK, in Western Sydney, here in Australia, in parts of the US, was that there was an influx of Muslim immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, and they were taking over certain areas. Now, whether that was a fair assessment or not, who knows? Because most immigrants do tend to congregate in the same few suburbs or the same few areas. But one of the concerns was that they would eventually try to express their views on what should happen and overpower the views that already stand in the United States or in Australia, etc. Now, we're seeing that today. 30 years ago, you would never have seen protests at US colleges to this degree, supporting one side over the other. You certainly wouldn't have seen the anti-Jewish type of sentiment that we are seeing today. And if you did, it certainly wouldn't be from the black community or from the left. You definitely wouldn't see it from there. Now we're seeing it. So things have changed. The voices that are being silenced are the Jewish voices. When we talk about minorities here, the voices that are being silenced are the voices of those students who currently are being depicted as belonging to a group of people who have oppressed another group. And that is not an accurate depiction. And the whole situation in the Middle East, for anybody that knows anything about the Middle East, as I've said on previous shows, this issue is not going to be resolved between Palestine and Israel because there's too much international interference. The way that's going to be solved is by the Western countries negotiating something with the Middle East. And what that's going to look like, I don't know. But the fact that we have the level of hostility and instability at college campuses and university campuses, as well as just in general in our cities, is not acceptable. And have a look at some of the responses we've had. The Republicans have joined the Democrats now in passing laws that say that if you say something that could be considered anti-Semitic, it's a crime. So people say, what about my freedom of speech? But you've also got people that are saying, well, I can't even say anything about this without being attacked. Is that conducive to creating an environment with which ideas can be expressed, where people can communicate, where we can just sit down and talk? As all the protests, whether it be race, climate, etc., they say, oh, we just want to start a conversation. But as soon as somebody comes to the table and says, hey, look, I agree with you that we need to do something. What do you think that should be? They get attacked and attacked and attacked. That doesn't do anything other than give these protest organizers a disproportionate amount of influence that they don't deserve.
So, I mean, anti-Semitic hate crimes were already had already tripled before the Hamas war started. So that we were already in an atmosphere of anti-Semitism. At the same time, I think that people's awareness of the situation in Gaza, just regular people, has increased in the past 7 months that the war has been going on. Is there going to be overreach on each side? Yeah, but
in all the media that you watch, all the media, whether from Fox to CNN and everything in between, NBC, ABC, etc., everywhere, have you seen one single talk back moment where they've actually said, or they've brought guests on and they've said, look, the solution that we think should be is this or that or the other. What do? They keep beating the same bush, the same drum. It's either a two-state solution, which Palestinians say they don't want and have never wanted, and now Israel says they don't want, or it's a one-state solution, which how is that going to work, or it's something else. Has there been any discussion that you can think of?
There's not a lot of that, but there is
where they've actually had a conversation about that.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a lot of that. There has been talk about getting a ceasefire, which is an actual thing that could maybe happen.
Sure, but
So
again,
what I watched, from what I watched,
and let's let this current situation quell. Okay, then what? There is absolutely no conversation that I can find in mainstream media or in politics that talks about what the end goal is and how to bring this to a solution. There just isn't one.
I beg to differ. Just to point out a couple of things. There was protests that were even worse than this in our history, where they did send in I think it was the National Guard or the cops, and they killed some people on campus. What protest was that?
Vietnam.
Exactly. So that has happened in our history, and we're trying to avoid that same situation. What's going on now? Again, we all agree that it's atrocious when they say anti-Semitic things. We also all agree when they say anti-Muslim things. Those are all atrocious things. Talking about the middle ground, there have been solutions proposed, and there have in terms of the what's going on in Israel and Gaza. But again, on the college campuses, again, taking where the negotiations have happened for some students in their college campuses, and there has been a solution for those college students to be happy and okay with what has just taken place and quelling that protest. That's part of the solution for the destabilization that we all agree that is there. Now, in terms of what's going on in Gaza, the solutions that people have actually proposed, and I've watched multiple programs on this, and yes, there are some stations that don't even talk about it. But yes, the two-state solution, honestly, which was the U.S. position for years, that is what's being the best solution, because the people of Palestine want their land to be able to govern the way that they want to. And yes, there are people in Palestine that don't want it. We agree there. But there are also others that do. But the best solution is, yes, that two-state solution. The people of Israel, yes, the people, Netanyahu's right-wing organization have pushed. They don't want a two-state solution. That's why Netanyahu has...
You are not like most people in the West, because we got like a minute and a half left, and I left several times that you could say all the things that you wanted to say.
You asked a question, and I'm trying to answer your question.
All right, take out the last 2 minutes. I'll go. See ya.
I'm finishing out. So yes, Netanyahu's pushed for that one state.
90 seconds left.
I'm trying to finish, and you come back in and yell. So yes, Netanyahu and his right-wing organization, his right-wing government has pushed not for a two-state solution because he was against that, and that's why he was funding Hamas in the background, because he felt that that was a good play, so he could argue against a two-state solution. But yes, the whole world is begging for a two-state solution now, because even there were some Muslim governments have put forth the idea that a two-state solution is a better solution, and they will help putting that. I think Qatar and a few other governments have put that forward. The few other Muslim countries. Take it away, Rick.
I think it's two-state solution with occupation by somebody other than Israel, because Israel can't be trusted to occupy. And can you get foreign governments, not Israel, to do an occupation that?
That'd be
We're getting to wrap up. The only thing I was going to add, and Shaquille might be interested to know this as well, is that there were some, just like we were talking about the Palestinians getting the scholarship, there have been things that have been done on the opposite side as well. Because I know that I think that it was Chick-fil-A or somebody like that gave some money to some of the protesters that protected what they said was the American flag and all along those lines. So there have been some efforts to kind of give money to the counter protesters as well, because there's somebody that agreed with whatever that stance was. Because like I said, I think it was a corporation that did that recently and everything. I think it was Chick-fil-A, if I remember correctly.
We're over the
a hedge fund head that gave money to the group event, the the fraternity group that protected the flag on UNC's campus. He did that just recently, and we're also raising money for that.
We're over the hour. When Jacoby says something like the best solution is a two-state solution, I don't think that Jacoby or anybody else, for that matter, is qualified to be able to state equivocally.
Shaq, make a better solution. Make a better solution. Don't put it on me. Make a better solution.
You know what, Jacoby, you're right. I'm wrong. Everybody else is wrong. Everybody who has an opinion different to you.
If you don't have an answer, then don't tell me that my solution's bad.
Jacoby, you're a genius. We should elect you.
Are you saying that there's a solution other than the two-state solution? Because I've been thinking
no.
If there's a better solution, propose it.
I am not so arrogant, Mark, as to suggest that one thing is or isn't. What we have is a problem where I'm 40 years old. My entire life, the entire Western world has said that we should have a two-state solution. Clearly, that isn't working. And the Palestinian people are saying, hey, Israel has got some of the most fertile land.
We've never had it.
So, I don't think that it's as simple as this. If it was as simple as this, it would have been done. It's not. It's complicated. But anyway, at that, I'm an idiot. Jacoby, you're a genius, and we'll put you in charge of the whole world.
Nobody's ever said that, Shaq, and nobody said that my solution was the best. You added that in. I never even stated that. On top of that, instead of complaining about the problem all the time, which you keep saying that we're doing, come up with a solution that is better than what has been suggested by these individuals that you say are not talking about it, because they actually are. And so that was a proposed solution that they came up with. If you have a better one, suggest it. Don't keep complaining about what I keep saying. Let's have a discussion and not, hey, you're a bad person.
All right, I gotta go. I gotta take
get on out here and everything.
Otherwise,
Time
they'll
to
be
end
on the carpet.
media show and everything, and I've got another show to do as well later on this evening. There was a bit of irony that I think Jacoby and Rick would have enjoyed, and Shaquille was there as well. But earlier today, the guest who was on the economic show thought that we all had similar mindsets, and as this show just proved, we don't have similar mindsets, because he was thinking that we all had the same viewpoint. The guest who was on this evening, and even Shaquille pointed out that there are people that are on the left and people on the right, and that this is probably one of the most across the spectrum networks and everything. So that was interesting that guest on the economic show was thinking that all the guests were of the similar mindset. But on that note, we're getting ready to get on out of here, and we're going to have more shows later on, including World Edition on tomorrow and World Politics on tomorrow as well.